Welcome to the 34th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we're doing a preview episode for UFC 264, headlined by the trilogy fight between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier. I'm going to give you all my thoughts and opinions on that fight, and I'm going to take a look at some of the other very important fights on this card, like Wonderboy versus Gilbert Burns, as that has big title implications. And I'm going to look at some of the other fights that I really like Tai Tuivasa versus Greg Hardy. That should be an interesting fight at heavyweight. It's a little bit too high on the card, but we'll talk more about that later. I'm going to talk about Sean O'Malley and his new opponent, and then I'm going to take a look and talk about any other fights that I like. So we're obviously going to start right off here. At the main event, we have the trilogy fight between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier. Now, I would love to come out and give you my pick on who I think is going to win this fight right away, right off the jump, but I am so undecided. For me, this fight is like a 50-50, 55-45. I'm leaning towards Dustin Poirier a little bit. Now, why am I leaning towards Dustin Poirier? That's because right after that second fight, I was very confident that Poirier would be able to win the trilogy fight very easily. And then as we've gotten closer and closer, I have become less and less confident in Poirier and more confident in Conor. And that's not a knock on Poirier. He hasn't done anything to make me lose trust in him winning this fight. However, it is through Conor and some of the things that I've seen and read and heard Conor say. Now, that might just be me kind of sipping the Kool-Aid and falling for the trap that is, modern media and Conor McGregor. But I do believe that he's coming in with a better mindset in this fight. If you look at his mindset against Cowboy and against the rematch against Poirier, if you look at his mindset in both of those fights, he almost seemed happy to be there, in my opinion. I mean, you can really tell right before the fight when he's walking out, when Conor was walking out to the octagon, it didn't seem like he was on a mission. It seemed like he was happy to be there, and it seemed like he was absorbing the moment because for a long period, we didn't know if Conor was ever going to fight again. And I think that might be where that stemmed from. And I mean, I'm sure Conor didn't know if he was ever going to fight again through some of the troubles that he had after the Khabib fight and after the Floyd fight. He probably didn't know if he was ever going to fight in MMA again. So when he comes back, I mean, he's probably just, happy to be there and happy he can get back in the octagon. And I think that is reflected in some of the things he said in the build-up, why he was so respectful and things like that. And when you just watch him walk out to the octagon, specifically right before the fight starts and his name is getting introduced, I mean, it seems like he is just taking the moment in. If you look at the fights against the likes of Eddie Alvarez and Jose Aldo, Chad Mendez and many others, he seemed like he was on more of a mission, and that's an attitude from Conor. And I think that attitude is a lot more beneficial to winning a fight. I mean, I don't think that having the attitude of I'm happy to be here is ever going to help you win anything in life at all, let alone a fight. So I think this new attitude and, kind of a loss is a good thing to help you have an attitude change. And I think the new attitude we're seeing from Conor is going to help him a lot in this fight. And that doesn't mean that he's going to win solely based off an attitude change, but I think that is one component that can really help Conor win this fight. And when we're looking at some other things that kind of make me more confident in the fact that Conor can win, after the second fight, he did land a lot of good shots. I think he won the first round. And when he's talking in these press conferences about sending electric shocks through Dustin Poirier's body with the shots that he landed, rewatching that fight, he landed a lot of really good shots. Now, the problem was he didn't follow up on any of them. There were times where he had Dustin wobbled, and it looked like he was content with the wobble. He had him, a little wobbled, a little stunned, nothing too crazy. Nothing that, this isn't a Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz situation. this is a, okay, he's a little wobbly. He felt that one. I think that's the best way to describe it, is he really felt that shot that kind of laid on him. So directly after that, what comes next? It's nothing. It's a reset, and now we get back into exchanging punches and kicks, and I think that really hurt Conor in that second fight, because when you reset, so he lands a shot that hurts Dustin. He gives Dustin time to recover. Dustin's able to land some more leg kicks, and then eventually the tides turn to where that leg is compromised. And when you see Conor's leg get hurt, Dustin doesn't step back, let a reset happen, and kind of get back, in more of a neutral position. He pressures right away. And I think if Conor can pressure and make that adjustment and pressure more after a stun or wobble, I think he's going to see a lot more success in this fight. And that will help limit Dustin's offense. And anytime you're limiting Dustin's offense, that's going to be, that's such a beneficial thing that you can do. Anytime you're limiting anyone's offense, but considering how powerful Dustin is, if Conor's having troubles against leg kicks this fight, just for an example, and then he can kind of get Dustin wobbled and put Dustin in very defensive positions for some periods of time, it's going to help Conor not absorb so many leg kicks. And that's just an example. And, you don't want to get punched in the face by Dustin Poirier either, because he is a powerful, powerful lightweight. So if we can see Conor pressure more after these initial blows, I think he's going to have a lot more success, and he's going to have a much better chance at finishing Dustin. Now, the one concern is he's talking about he in the press conference and in interviews leading up to this, he has made it seem like he's going to put Dustin out cold. Now, I don't think that is a good idea. I would never advise anyone to go in there and try and put Dustin Poirier out cold. If you can get a TKO and you can get the ref to pull you off him, do that. Don't go for the clean KO. Take any chance you can get to get Dustin Poirier out of there. If you look at the two biggest knockout losses on Poirier's record, that's Michael Johnson and that's Conor McGregor. Now, in neither of those instances was he knocked out cold and had to get woken up. As much as Conor would like to make it seem like that's the way it was in the first fight, those were TKOs where both guys did land clean shots and Poirier went down. Obviously, that was a long time ago in his career. It's been a long time since he was rocked like that. But back to it, in both of those exchanges, they were TKOs. Dustin wasn't stiff. He got back up afterwards both times, especially in the Conor fight. So don't go in there and, force a KO. You can settle for a TKO. A TKO over Dustin Poirier is still a massive accomplishment. You don't have to lay him stiff like a board. And that is one thing that kind of concerned me, because if you're Conor, you haven't been able to lay. As much as Conor has power, he's never landed. The biggest shot he's ever landed was against Jose Aldo, and he did put Jose Aldo out cold, so that's one exception. But if you look at like the Mendes fight or the Eddie Alvarez fight, neither of those guys were out cold. Both those guys were knocked down, and the ref pulled them off after they were, shelled up in a corner. Even in his earlier fights, if you look at, say, which one was it? I think it was Diego Brandao. I might be wrong on that. He wasn't out cold. He's not putting guys out cold. He's getting TKOs. And that's okay. There's nothing against that. There's nothing wrong with that. And we don't see as many guys out cold at 155 and 145. So that's not a big deal. It's okay to get a TKO. But what I'm saying is don't feel like you have to get a KO. And I think that could come back to hurt Conor. But another thing is Conor's back is up against the wall. Conor has a lot more to lose than Dustin Poirier. And I think that would, when I say a lot more to lose, I don't mean like in life. Conor can step away from fighting at any time and be a successful businessman. I'm talking about in the aspect of fighting. If Poirier loses this fight, it's a loss, and he's going to have to recover from it, and it's not going to be beneficial in any way. That's fine. However, for Conor, he if he loses this fight, Conor's biggest thing was always an aura of invincibility. That is completely gone if he loses this fight. I mean, if you look at his run up to the title, part of the reason his trash talk was so great is because people believed every word he was saying. Now, when you have, you know, people are saying his trash talk isn't as good now, it's because people aren't believing what he's saying. When, he said he was going to put Jose Aldo out cold, and he did it, people believed that he was going to do it. That's part of the reason saying he's going to do it makes it, feel a lot more real. Now when he's saying he's going to send Dustin Poirier out on a stretcher, people don't believe it, so it makes the aura of Conor McGregor lesser. Now you can get that back, and putting Dustin Poirier out cold is a good way to do it. But if you lose again, and now if you even look at the reporter who said you've won one fight since Obama was president, that's a little misleading because he's fought 3 times, and one being against Khabib and one being against Poirier. A lot of fighters are going to go 1-2 in those 3 fights, and that's just the way it is. So that was a little deceiving, but that's the way a lot of people perceive Conor as being a 1-2 in his last 3. And when you chalk it up in its simplest forms, it's not a great look. And if you fall to 1-3, I mean, what's next for Conor if that happens? I mean, obviously the trilogy with Nate Diaz is always going to be there. But if Conor goes out and beats Nate Diaz in a trilogy after losing to Poirier, does that all of a sudden mean Conor's back? Then he'd be 2-3 in his last 5 with the win over Cowboy and Nate Diaz. Would he be forced to move to 170? Does anyone believe if Conor loses to Dustin Poirier, does anyone believe that he can go in there and compete with the likes of, the top 5 at 170, like Usman, Colby, Masvidal? Masvidal's not even in the top 5 anymore. Wonder Boy, Gilbert Burns. Does he compete with these guys if he loses to Dustin Poirier? I mean, it really would put him in a really tough spot, and I don't think he would have more than one clear fight left if he loses this. For Dustin, if Dustin loses, he's got a lot of options. I mean, there's Gaethje, there's Chandler, there is, there's Dos Anjos. There's a lot of guys at 155, or we could see Dustin move up to 170 because he is massive at this point for 155, and we could see him take on the likes of, Colby Covington, who he does have a little bit of a beef with already. We could see him take on the likes of the other guys at 170, and that's if he wants to, move up to 170. He could always stay at 155, take on more contenders, and work his way to a title, and that's more of a realistic approach for Dustin to do that than Conor, because Conor Mania and the aura around Conor, when that's gone, what do you have left? There's no reason to fight if the aura and the cloak of invincibility is gone. There's no reason to have Conor continue fight. There's no reason for Conor to fight if those things are gone and they're not present. I mean, so in that sense, Conor has a lot more pressure on him, and his back is up against the wall a lot more than Poirier, a lot more. If you are looking this from there's 2 lenses you can look at this from. There's the lens of the hardcore MMA fan, and that's probably people listening to this right now is going to be more hardcore fans, people you see on Twitter talking, people a part of MMA Twitter. There's that lens, and then there's the wider lens. There's the average person. The majority of people don't look at MMA the way that people who listen to this podcast or interact on Twitter about MMA, they don't look at MMA through the same lens as a hardcore fan does. So for Conor losing to Dustin, if you are a hardcore fan and you love the sport, you understand how good Dustin is, and you know that Dustin is an elite, all-time great lightweight, and you don't hold that as much against Conor because you understand how difficult of a challenge this was, especially beating him in a third fight that in reality is more like a rematch, simply because in my book the first fight really doesn't count. 7 years ago, different weight class. This is more like a rematch from the fight we saw in January, in my opinion. And being able to beat someone with this high of a fight IQ and as high of a, team around him. Dustin Poirier has a very good team around him, and his coaches are great, coming up with great game plans. He's a tough guy to beat the first time, and he's probably even tougher to beat the second time around, and now technically this is the third time around. So hardcore fans get how big of a deal that would be for Conor to do that, and they understand the challenge that he's facing here. A lot of casual fans have no fucking clue who Dustin Poirier is. They have no idea who Dustin Poirier is, and in their mind, Conor losing to Poirier, he's a bum. You know, that's how a lot of people view Dustin Poirier, because they don't know who he is. In their minds, they can name 5 fighters. 2 of them have the last name Diaz. One of them's Conor McGregor, and maybe they know Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre just because. For some reason, they saw him on Instagram or something. And maybe they know Francis Ngannou because they saw him knock out 3 dudes in a 15-second Instagram clip. You know, those people who I was just talking about, they are not going to look at this through the same lens as a hardcore fan who knows who Dustin Poirier is. They're going to look at this fight completely differently. And those people that look at that fight differently, they're the people that cause pay-per-view buys, you know. There's only so many hardcore MMA fans, and that's a floor of, you know, that's the floor of pay-per-view buys. You know, whether that's 500,000 or whether that's 300,000 or whether that's 200,000, there's a floor there. And however many of those people stream, you know, it happens. I don't know what more to say about that. But in terms of marketability and being a star, this is close to the end for Conor McGregor. So that's just more up to the point of Conor's got his back up against the wall here. And there is nothing more to be said about that than he has to go and win this fight if he wants to continue being in big fights. You know, Conor doesn't get to box again if he loses this fight. You know, no one's going to care about him fighting Floyd if Conor's, you know, won one of his last 3 in the UFC. Nobody cares anymore. You know, people would care more about, you know, just some random dude, Logan Paul. Well, I guess not some random dude, but you get what I'm saying. In the aspect of combat sports, Logan Paul has nothing for Floyd. People care more about that than they would about a Conor rematch with Floyd if he loses this fight. Because they're going to look at Conor and say, he can't beat Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier knocked him out. How is he going to beat Floyd? So that's just my thoughts for Conor here. And I think when Conor has his back up against the wall and when he's feeling the pressure, he said in the press conference that he doesn't feel pressure, but I think he feels pressure and uses it differently than other fighters. You know, in the times where he's had the most pressure against Jose Aldo and Eddie Alvarez, those were 2 of his best performances. I mean, so if he has that same amount of pressure here, maybe he can come up with another masterpiece like he plans. And, you know, when you look at it like that, those are some of the reasons that I think that I just talked for 20 minutes, basically, about why I have more faith in Conor this time around than I did, you know, 6 months ago. However, with that being said, Dustin Poirier still did beat him in the second fight, and he still has a lot of the things that you need to have to beat Conor. I mean, the main thing is the camp and team around Dustin Poirier is going to be able to craft a game plan that can help beat Conor McGregor. And there's the big talk in the second fight was leg kicks. And that was a clear game plan that if they can get Conor with leg kicks and get a leg hurt, they'll be able to, you know, land strikes more easily. Obviously, it's MMA. When you can land leg kicks, you'll be able to, and especially if you can immobilize a leg, you can land shots to the head a lot easier. It's just simple. So they came in with that game plan, and it worked. Now, Conor's not an idiot. As stubborn as he may be in some circumstances, he knows if he doesn't check a leg kick, he's screwed. And he knows that if he lets Dustin kick him in the leg 20 times, it's going to be the same fight. So Conor's going to come in, and I believe he's going to have a game plan on how to avoid or check or counter leg kicks. Now, Here's the thing, is Dustin Poirier, I can't imagine that Dustin Poirier is coming in with the game plan, and this is partially due to his fight IQ and his team around him. At ATT, tremendous gym, tremendous at coming up with game plans for fighters. Now, if you look at that, if Dustin Poirier, what it's gonna come down to in this fight is a counter game plan. It sounds kind of weird, but Dustin's gonna go out there, he's gonna throw leg kicks, right? And I'm sure Dustin Poirier already has a plan as to what he's gonna do if Conor comes out there and checks 3 leg kicks. I'm sure he's gonna have some plan or game plan as to how he can switch it up. So whoever is going to be able to adjust on the fly to the way that this fight is going to win this fight. And in my mind, when I say that statement, I think that makes me lead to Dustin Poirier having a much bigger advantage because he's got that team at ATT. As much as I love Conor for sticking with his team and his guys in John Kavanagh and Owen Roddy, John Kavanagh has came out and talked several times after Conor McGregor losses, and it's always like, what is going on? And it's something that never gets talked about in the lead up to fights. If you look at the fight with Khabib, their plan, John Kavanagh said after the fight, was for Conor to lay on the ground and pretty much wait for the next round or that round to end and, have the ref get it on the feet. They didn't want to waste energy on escaping. Now, we saw in that fight that Conor probably shouldn't have laid on the ground and let Khabib ground and pound his face, and there was no in-fight adjustment on that strategy. If you come in with this strategy and that strategy fails, that happens. It's MMA, but you have to overcome and adapt. That is something that Conor has not done, and that's probably the team around him. He didn't change that game plan. The Khabib fight went to round 4, That got to round 4, and we didn't see a change in game plan. And, hey, their game plan was try and stop the first takedown. If you don't stop it, just wait it out and then try and knock him out at the beginning of the next round. That's a terrible game plan. And when it didn't work the first 3 rounds, you think the 4th round, they'd be like, well, we got to go win a round. Because going into the 4th round, Khabib's got 2. Conor's got 1 round. You have to win the last 2. You can't lay on the bottom to win a round. And we saw no adjustment. If you look after the Poirier fight, John Kavanagh came out and said, we didn't think leg kicks were going to be a problem. Have you watched MMA? Have you watched MMA since Conor's last fight? We have seen leg kicks, and this was, I believe it wasn't shortly after. Maybe I've got my timetables wrong, but if you look at, even if you only watch the main event of pay-per-views, you saw what Israel Adesanya did to Paulo Costa with leg kicks. So it's not like this is some hidden secret that no one knew about. It was becoming a trend and a meta in the sport, and it's something that John Kavanagh said, hey, I didn't think it was going to be a problem. It just doesn't make any sense. So when I take those 2 things into account, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, what is it going to be this time? Thankfully, the Cowboy fight didn't get past, 40 seconds. So there was no, oops, we didn't have a great game plan. You don't need a game plan when you can land big shots and put them out in 40 seconds. It's just the way it is. So in his last 2 fights that have gone past a minute, we have seen very big holes in game plans. And then John Kavanagh has came out afterwards and said, oh yeah, we messed that up. We won't do that again. But then it's just something else in the next fight where, what are we doing here? And I don't know if that's John Kavanagh taking the fall for Conor to try and get some negative press off Conor. It might be. He might be more than willing to have negative press towards himself, and he might be willing to take those shots like I'm saying right now. But it is concerning. It is concerning thinking of that and knowing how on the other side, has there ever been a time where an ATT fighter or in a Dustin Poirier fight where they came out and said, oh, we did an oopsie with that game plan. We won't make that mistake again. That's never happened. And Kamaru was able to knock out Jorge. Obviously, he's an ATT fighter, but that wasn't from having the wrong game plan. That was from Kamaru having a very well-executed straight hand that Jorge said he thought was going to be a takedown, so his hands were low. And then the right hand comes up, gets you in the face, you're done. That's not a lack of game plan. That's Kamaru being a very skillful fighter and taking advantage of the tools he has to win a fight. And even if you look at Colby Covington fights, Colby's always gone in there and stuck to a game plan that works for him. That's obviously before he left ATT. So maybe it's also just hasn't made its way to the press because it's not Conor McGregor. Things that Conor McGregor does has a way to make its way to the press a lot easier. And that's just the way it is. So maybe we're just blind to the fact that this happens to everybody all the time. And it's not just Conor. But like I said, I have a lot more trouble thinking that Conor is going to come in with a better game plan for this fight than Dustin Poirier is going to be. And I think that is going to be very, very damaging in the long term of who's going to win this fight. The other thing that I saw in the first fight that helped me come to kind of a realization that Poirier would be able to win the third fight was he ate the shots from Conor. I mean, in my pre-fight prediction going into the second fight, I said Dustin gets hit, and he does get hit. Now, the way I looked at this was Dustin has a chin. He's going to get hit. I thought it was going to be very similar to the Eddie fight, where Conor, bing, 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 combo, sits him down, doesn't get the finish. Poirier is able to work back up, bing, 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 another knockdown. I thought it was going to be something similar, and we'd see a second round KO. That was my prediction. Now, that kind of happened. Poirier got hit in that fight, like we talked about earlier. But the fact that Poirier got hit with some very good shots by Conor McGregor and didn't fall and, stayed composed, stick to a game plan, and eventually came out on top. That, to me, is something that is heart, and it is composure, and it is, a lot of things that you need to beat Conor McGregor. And that doesn't disappear in a 6-month span. That chin didn't go anywhere for 6 months. That heart didn't just get up and leave in the last 6 months. The attributes that Poirier had that allowed him to fight through the early shots that Conor gave him, that didn't just get up and walk out the door. Poirier's cardio to be able to go out, and if this needs to go 5 rounds, Poirier's ability and experience in 5-round fights against the likes of Max Holloway and others, that didn't just get up and walk out the door in the last 6 months. All the attributes that he had that helped him win the first fight are still there. And taking those things into account, so basically, I've talked about the game plan, chin, and cardio of Poirier versus the new attitude, bad game plans, and, slight adjustments that could be made for Conor. Taking those things into account, I do still lean Dustin Poirier in this fight, like I said at the very beginning of this episode. And that is me trying to be unbiased, because I will sit here and be honest, Conor might be my favorite fighter. If not, he's top 5. And Conor is one of the reasons that I started watching MMA. So, I am biased here, and I'm trying to be unbiased, but I do think, and that bias may be why I think that it's going to be why I'm so undecided, wishy-washy, 50-50, slight Poirier lean. Maybe if I wasn't such a big Conor fan, maybe I'd be 100% on Team Poirier and think he was going to win this fight. But it's impossible to get rid of bias in MMA. If you like a fighter, that's always going to be there. And I think taking those things into account, trying to be unbiased as I can, I still think I think Dustin's going to win this fight, in a very... I'm not confident in it. I'm not confident in that prediction. But like I said, it's 55-45 in, my confidence level here. Because I do think Conor's going to look better. But those things that Poirier had that helped him win the first fight are still there. And for those reasons, I feel like I'd be an idiot not to take Dustin Poirier. And if I'm wrong here, I'll be just fine being wrong, picking Poirier and having Conor win. Because I love Conor. And I think that he's great for the sport. If Conor goes out there and does what he said he was going to do and has Dustin Poirier leave the octagon in a stretcher after a vicious knockout, the UFC is in a better spot, and that will help the sport grow. And that is something that I value because I want to see the sport of MMA grow because it is my favorite sport. I sit here and talk about it an hour at least a week. So why would I want to see something that hurts the sport? And I think that Conor winning helps the sport in terms of popularity because there's nothing like Conor McGregor. So I hope Conor can get it done, but right now, if you put a gun to my head and make me give you a prediction, I think it's going to be Poirier. And I think it's going to be close. I'd say Poirier by decision. Would I be surprised if Poirier is able to win by knockout? I wouldn't be surprised. Would I be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised? I'd be surprised with a submission here in this fight. I think this is going to be a largely stand-up battle. I think that Conor, has proven that he's a lot better on the ground than people give him credit for. We saw Conor knows what to do when he's on the ground. When he got taken down by Poirier, he got taken down in the middle of the cage. That's the worst spot to get taken down. And he was able to butt scoot to the fence, work his way up, switch positions, get into a better position on the fence, land some shots in the clinch up against the fence, disengage, be back and stand up. That is perfect textbook. Obviously don't want to get taken down in the first place, but that there shows me that if he gets taken down, he can get back up. Now, will he be able to get back up in the 5th round like he did in the 1st round? Only time will tell. And I know I don't want to hear anyone say, oh, hey, Khabib was able to take him down. Khabib could take down a horse and hold it down. So I sure hope he could take down Conor and hold him down. He can do that to anybody, okay? So let's not bring in Khabib in discussion when we're talking about Conor's takedown defense, okay? Khabib could take down 185-pounders and hold them down. So let's not hold it against Conor. It doesn't make any sense. No one else is going to come in with that good of wrestling. But back on track here. Like I said, I think I've pretty much wrapped it up. I'm leaning Poirier by decision. I'm not going to be surprised if there's a knockout either way. Both guys could go out there and knock each other out, and I wouldn't be surprised. We saw Dustin knock out Conor in the rematch. We saw Conor knock out Dustin in the first fight. As long ago it was, he still did it. And we saw Conor land good shots in the second fight that could have potentially led to a finish. So I'm not going to be surprised if there's a knockout. I just think that in this type of fight, it's going to be a long, drawn-out battle. And I lean Poirier. He was able to win a long, drawn-out battle against Max Holloway, an all-time great in cardio, an all-time great regardless. And I know Conor won a long, drawn-out fight with Nate Diaz, but I think that Max Holloway is more dangerous in a 5-round fight than Nate Diaz, and that's just my opinion. So I give the advantage there to Dustin Poirier. And Dustin Poirier has been in many more wars other than the Max Holloway fight. Conor's only been in one real 5-round war. Dustin's been in many, many wars. And maybe that could come to hurt him. Maybe that could, we see sometimes people who get into wars, eventually one day it's gone. This could be that day. I don't think it's going to be. But to completely wrap it up, and I'm not going to go on another, short tangent after this, I've got Dustin by decision, and it's close. It's close. I might change my mind by tomorrow, but as of right now, I'm saying Dustin by decision, and it only took me 34 minutes to come to that conclusion. So, now that we have talked about that, I'm going to say one thing about the press conference. One thing. The one thing I have to say about the press conference is a lot of people were saying Conor's trash talk was bad. Here's what I'm going to say. Conor's trash talk seemed bad because it wasn't as good as prime Conor trash talk. Prime Conor trash talk is top tier. Top tier. Current Conor trash talk is still very, very good. And his ability to talk trash and have it seem that intense and that real when he has lost he's won one of his last 3, and he's talking trash to a guy that just knocked him out, that's fighting an uphill battle, and he did a good job fighting an uphill battle. He made it at least halfway up the hill. He might have not got all the way up the hill, but that's a steep hill you got to climb talking all that trash against someone who just knocked you out. It's not easy. Few people have done it, and they did it in very different ways. Chael was able to do it against Anderson in the rematch. He talked some good trash, and he did it with a completely different strategy. You know, he was saying he won the first fight and was saying he was the champ, and he kind of put a comical spin on it. Bisping did it against Rockhold because Rockhold made himself look like an idiot, and then Bisping pretty much said, hey, you're an idiot. So that was more Rockhold shooting himself in the foot, and then Bisping saying, hey, look, he shot himself in the foot. You know, we had an all-time great trash talker in Bisping going up against an all-time worst trash talker in Rockhold. You know, a little different there. But Conor didn't do a bad job at the press conference. Might have been a little extreme. People were making fun of him for throwing hot sauce into the crowd because he did the belt against Aldo. When you did something so great like take the belt from Aldo, and then people say, haha, now he's taking hot sauce, not belts. Well, Dustin doesn't have a belt to take. And, you know, it's like, you know, when you do something that is, it's like Masvidal KOing Ben Askren in 5 seconds. If he does anything, his next knockout isn't going to be as good. That's just the way it is. That's all I'm going to say about the press conference. Actually, one more thing. I know I said one thing, but I've got one more thing. The other thing is, Dustin had some good lines in there, but good Lord, he missed so many opportunities. Like when Conor said, hey, your wife's your husband, all Dustin has to say is, hey, there's rumors and pictures and videos of you cheating on your wife. Don't tell me about my wife. And then it's like, you know, don't have much to say after that. He said it in a post-fight or a post-press conference interview, which is a weird thing already, post-press conference interview. He said the pretty much around the same thing when talking to Brett Okamoto. Why didn't you say it at the press conference? Doesn't make much sense, you know. But Conor's an easy guy to talk trash against because, you know, you can talk about how he punched an old man at the bar. You can talk about, you know, all his assault allegations and, you know, rumors of him cheating on his wife. You can talk about how he's won one fight since Obama was president. There's a lot of things on the table, but no one seems to take advantage of it when they're talking trash against him now, currently. So, just something to think about. Moving on, we just talked for 40 minutes about Conor versus Dustin, and now we're short on time here, so we're going to talk about these next fights real quick. This one's going to be the longest of them because it is the most important of them. Gilbert Burns versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in the co-main event. This fight is crucial. I think it's more important for Wonderboy than it is for Gilbert Burns. The clock is ticking for Wonderboy in terms of getting his shot at a title. He doesn't have much time left to get another title shot. He is getting up there in age. And I think if he wins this fight, he's got a very good case to fight for the title. He's the highest ranked guy who hasn't fought Usman yet, and he would have a win against Vicente Luque, Jeff Neal, and Gilbert Burns. That's a pretty good resume in terms of building yourself up to a title. I mean, he had to climb the ranks again, it seems like. So, beating Gilbert Burns, especially if he knocks him out, that would be a pretty good, you know, hey, I deserve a title. And the fact that they haven't booked Colby versus Usman yet, which was a alleged fight, the fact that they haven't booked that yet really makes me wonder what's going on. I don't think Usman wants that fight. I think he wants someone new. And I'm not saying he's afraid of Colby. I am not saying that. I'm saying just because someone doesn't want a fight doesn't mean they're afraid. That's not what I'm saying. Don't get that twisted. I just don't think he wants that fight. I think he wants something fresh, someone who hasn't fought yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. And getting a win against Gilbert Burns is a pretty good case for, hey, I deserve a title. And then when you look behind you and say, I also beat Vicente Luque and Jeff Neal, and I've done all this in the past. And, you know, the only other guy would be Colby and Leon running around right now. I mean, this would be a perfect opportunity for, you know, for Colby versus Masvidal, Usman versus Wonderboy. You know, if Gilbert Burns can easily win this fight, I might even be picking Gilbert Burns. But, you know, there's what I'm saying here is there's a lot on the line. I guess there's no point in talking about matchups. If Stephen Wonderboy Thompson wins, it's kind of pointless. We'll do that on Sunday if he does win. But for right now, there's a lot on the line for Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And Gilbert Burns, I don't know where he's going to go if he wins this fight. But this here, I can see this going either way. This is also very 50-50. And I feel like such a dork for every fight that comes up saying, oh, this one's 50-50. It could go either way. I feel like an idiot saying it, but I believe that. I could very easily see Stephen Wonderboy Thompson staying on the outside, landing kicks, landing jabs, you know, moving around, staying very evasive, hitting without getting hit, and doing so while staying out of takedown range. I think that's very possible. But would I be surprised if Gilbert Burns is able to land a big right hand and put him down? No. Would I be surprised if Gilbert Burns is able to take him down and submit him? Absolutely not. But as of right now, I think I'm going to go Wonderboy just because it seems like it's destined to happen. And I think that, you know, the fights with Tyron Woodley, I think that takedown defense has always been something that Wonderboy has practiced and been good at and has, you know, kind of known he needs to be good at. And going into this fight, he knows he has to stop takedowns. I think he'll be able to do so. And if he can stop takedowns, I think he's able to stay on the outside and pick Gilbert apart striking-wise. Next fight on the card, Tai Tuivasa versus Greg Hardy. Now, I've been very lenient on Greg Hardy in the past. I've said, hey, let him come in the UFC. Let him fight. He's a former football player. Should draw well. It'll be an interesting experiment. But, you know, he said something. He started talking trash to Derek Lewis. And he said, hey, Derek Lewis is an ex-con. I want to knock him out. Well, Derek Lewis went to jail for self-defense against a man, and Greg Hardy got arrested for beating his girlfriend. So, you know, what are we doing, Greg Hardy? What are we doing? The last thing you ever want to talk about is jail, because the second Greg Hardy talks about jail, 50 people are going to say, hey, you beat your girlfriend. And he did. So, hey, you know what? I tried being lenient on Greg Hardy in the past. I said, hey, it's a cool experiment to see an NFL player. Even though he's a dirtbag, I'd like to see an NFL player and see what he can do in MMA if he can go out there and, you know, dedicate his mind to it. I'd like to see a high-level athlete, see if he can make it in MMA. Well, you know, I shouldn't have been that lenient. I should have said from the jump, Greg Hardy's a dirtbag and he beats his girlfriend. But I said, we'll set that to the side, which I should have never done. I'm an idiot for doing it. Now he's taking on Tai Tuivasa, a fan favorite, a great guy. You know what? Hopefully Tai Tuivasa goes out there, knocks Greg Hardy out, and he gets cut from the UFC. Greg Hardy. So, that's my outlook for that fight. I tried being nice to Greg Hardy. I spoke very highly, a lot more highly than I should have in the past about Greg Hardy. So, I've had enough of him, and he just keeps saying stupid stuff, so you know what? Screw him. Then, on a much better note, we have Irene Aldana versus Yana Kutsayaka. Crossing my fingers that I said that right. I probably didn't, but you know what? It happens. My bad. So, Irene Aldana was someone who was someone who was very high in terms of prospects in the women's bantamweight, and she got a shot against Holly Holm, didn't win that fight. I think this is going to be a very close fight, and I think one of these women are eventually going to work their way up to Amanda Nunes at bantamweight. Obviously, we're not going to see that fight right now. Right now, we're seeing Juliana Pena, But the winner of this is putting themselves in a great spot to fight for the title. I lean Irene Aldana because I really like her boxing, so I'm picking Irene Aldana. Now, Sean O'Malley, the Sugar Show versus versus the UFC debuting Chris Montehino. I didn't get that one right. I'm not even crossing my fingers. That's my bad. Never seen him fight. UFC debut. So hopefully we'll learn how to say his name on Saturday when I watch him fight. I'll say it how John Anik says it. But Sean O'Malley is a big time prospect, and he's a bigger superstar than a lot of people realize. A lot more people know the name Sean O'Malley than, maybe, a big name like, you know what? I'm not going to say anybody's name, but a lot more people know Sugar Sean than a lot of ranked fighters in the UFC, and it's just the way it is. And he is an exciting prospect, and he deserves a lot of hype, and, if Sugar Sean loses this fight, he's dead in the water. If he loses this fight. And this is a big opportunity for Chris to go out against someone like Sean O'Malley and get a win. It's a very big opportunity, but I'm leaning O'Malley. I've watched him fight, and he's too talented to just toss to the side. We also have Carlos Condit versus Max Griffin. This will be an interesting one. Carlos Condit looked good in his last fight. Let's see if he can keep it up against someone like Max Griffin. We have Nico Price versus Michel Piejeda. This is going to be a crazy fight. That's all I have to say. My prediction is craziness. Nico Price, Michel Piejeda, they're both crazy. But if Michel Piejeda can control his craziness, when he controls his craziness, he looks tremendous. So I'm leaning towards Michel in this one. Ryan Hall, former top prospect at featherweight who hasn't fought in 2 years, against a current top prospect at featherweight in Ilia Topuria. Now, Ilia Topuria has looked great. I've spoken very highly of him on this podcast before, and I think he's good enough on the ground to stay off the ground with Ryan Hall. And if he can stay off the ground with Ryan Hall, I think he wins via knockout. Then we have Trevin Giles versus Duplessis. Interesting fight there. Trevin Giles is always someone that I want to watch. And then we have, on the early prelims, Jennifer Maia versus Jessica Ai. 2 women trying to make their way back up to the elite at 115. Very good matchmaking, and we'll see who comes out of that, as they're going to have a say in the title picture here. And, they're ranked 4 and 7, so they have some interesting matchups coming ahead. Omari Akhmedov and Brad Tavares fighting to stay ranked, probably, in the middleweight division. They're 13 and 15, so we'll see what happens in the future with them. And then I don't really know much about the first two fights, so we're not going to talk about those. That is all I have for this UFC 264 preview podcast. Don't know why I said podcast like that. I should have pronounced it like a normal person and said podcast. My bad. Now, there is some other news. There were some fight announcements. We're going to talk about all that on Sunday. I've got to get to work here. I've got to leave for work in 7 minutes. So we're not going to talk about that now. We'll talk about that on Sunday. Hopefully, I'll have the podcast posted on Sunday. Got to do that around the work schedule. Haven't gotten the work schedule for next week yet. But there will be a podcast posted post UFC 264. We're going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk in depth about Conor versus Poirier, like we did today. And that is probably going to be a very long episode, I will have to say. I talked about Conor and Poirier for 30 minutes, the pre-fight. There's probably at least 30 minutes coming in the post-fight. There was some news. There was a Kevin Holland fight announcement. There were a couple other fight announcements that I need to touch on. There was some other big news that I need to touch on inside the UFC. Nick Diaz fight announcement. We'll talk about that on Sunday. Sorry, I'm not talking about it now, but just don't have time, so we'll talk about it Sunday. This podcast will be uploaded on Friday, and as of recording, weigh-ins hadn't happened yet. So everything that I said today was pre-weigh-ins, and that could change. Who knows how Dustin's going to look at the weigh-ins because he does cut a lot of weight. So we'll see how he looks at weigh-ins, but I imagine I'm still going to my prediction is going to stay the same with Dustin via decision. And I'm excited to be back and talk about the post-fight. This is going to be a fun episode. We'll talk. There's going to be a lot to talk about. We're going to be talking about the title picture at 155. We'll be talking about the title picture at 170. We'll be talking about the future for Conor, whether that's Diaz, whether that's Oliveira. We're going to talk about the future for Poirier. If he loses, Diaz wouldn't be a bad name either. So, very, very excited. Should be a fun episode. Make sure you come back on Sunday for the 35th episode. This was the 34th episode. And the last thing I have to say is thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. We'll see you later.